Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Only Podcast. My name is Chris Vanini, your host. As always, joined here also, as always, by theonlycolors.com managing editor, Joe Toohey. Joe, how you
Hey, how's
doing?
it going? I'm doing well.
I think it's 2 weeks
Yeah.
in a row. I think it's 2 weeks in a row you jumped in right as I was giving your introduction.
Oh, I'll get better at that,
Yeah.
maybe.
How, so yeah, we're going to talk about Michigan State's win over Central Michigan in football last week. Going to preview Purdue. I don't think there's much else to talk about outside of. Well, I guess we could. I mean, we could mention the Miles Bridges commitment will be actually taking place during the Purdue game, so that'll be something to watch for if you're not at the game. We're also joined
Yeah.
here. We're also joined here by a kitten in the room in which I am recording this podcast. So if I say anything weird, it's probably directed at the kitten and not Joe. Though it might be. So, and there might be a barking dog or two in the background.
Is that why your friends call you Whiskers?
yes, that's exactly it. Now he's chewing up my free Sports Illustrated fleece that I got like 10 years ago. So Joe, you went to the. Did you go to the game? You have season tickets, right? Central game.
Yep, I was there.
So a 30-10 final score. A game that was pretty close throughout and honestly kind of played out how I expected. If people listened to the podcast last week, I thought Central would cover, and they did. They're 4-0 against the spread this year. MSU is actually now 0-4. But Central's got a good defense, which did a pretty good job of shutting down MSU's running game. They got a really good quarterback in Cooper Rush who performed very well. Given what he was working with and converted a number of big third downs. But like I also said, West Central just hasn't really made the winning plays this year, and that was evident again with getting 2 field goals blocked in the first half. I think they had a penalty to take them out of field goal range later on, so just a couple of mistakes there. But a game that was pretty close throughout. What would you take away from the game?
Yeah, I think, there were definitely some tense moments in the crowd, absolutely, especially when the score kind of hung around at 17-10 there for some period of time. I think I wrote this in my weekly Monday morning column that is sort of a box score deep dive. There are a couple things that made this game seem a little closer than it was. One was that it was a really slow pace. I mean, MSU had only 3 true drives in the first half. They also had a drive where they just kind of kneeled the ball out a few times. And they scored on all 3 of those drives. So what's weird is that, MSU only had a total of 8 true drives. There were 2 at the end of the second half as well. There was a set of kneel downs. So, yeah, ultimately a 20-point margin in which you only have 8 drives is pretty good. For comparison, last year in 2014, there was no game in which MSU's offense had fewer than 10 possessions.
Oh, wow.
And there was, against Nebraska, they had 18, actually. So, that kind of pace is going to make a game seem a lot closer than it probably is, sort of regardless of in general what the what's going on there. So that was interesting. The other thing,
and that's also noteworthy is when looking at MSU's total offense numbers, which I see people still citing. Cook only passed for this many yards. Well, it's relative, and the defense has actually played 20 more snaps this year than the offense has. So they're actually, I think, being outgained in total yardage by their opponents in 4 games. But part of that is again. MSU is, I think, like 119th in total offensive snaps. So that's something to keep in mind. Like you said, that's a good point about the amount of, just the sheer amount of possessions that they had.
Well, and the other thing is that there's a lot of things that go into total yardage, right? It's sort of like rebounding margin in basketball, where
right?
It's sort of
we don't do that here at the Only Colors.
Well, it sort of conflates a whole bunch of different stuff, right? Because so against Air Force, a big reason why MSU got outgained by more than 100 yards in that game was that there's a long fumble return touchdown by RJ Williamson.
Yeah.
If he had just fallen on that ball, who knows how many yards the offense ends up gaining on that drive. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is where drives start in terms of field position. So MSU has had much better field position on average than their opponents throughout the year, partially because Hartbarger's been as good or maybe even a little better than advertised. So, yeah, I mean, I've been pretty happy with the team in that sense. The other thing is, and this is just something that we've done, MSU has done for the last few years, is that they're running the ball a lot more than they're passing the ball. I mean, Connor Cook only had 19 passing attempts in this game against Central. So that's the other thing. And so, yeah, I mean, the number of snaps that you referenced, that probably has something to do with a relatively explosive running game, and then also sort of a penchant to either score or go 3 and out. So it's there's some funky stuff going on statistically with this team, but ultimately I'm not particularly concerned. And in fact, I thought there was a pretty positive sign at the end of the game that MSU was able to, even without Jack Conklin, run the ball effectively to sort of ice the game at the end there. Get a couple of touchdowns in the fourth quarter.
We're kind of bouncing around here, but that was something, when we started the team everybody of the running backs, made the point that you're going to see all of them, and when you get to the fourth quarter, you're going to have fresh running backs, and I think that was evident in a number of games this year already, where they've had when they need to run the ball, they've at least had fresh running backs. They couldn't quite do it against Oregon, but the backs are fresh because of the different guys they're using. Even like you said, when Jack Conklin wasn't in there.
Yeah, which is potentially a major issue. I mean, I know that on the depth chart this week, Conklin and Dennis Finley from Cass Tech were listed as co-starters. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if Conklin plays. The good news is that, it sounds like it's not season-ending, because D'Antonio said that, that those are the only ones that they talk about, and he won't talk about the Conklin injury. So that'll be pretty interesting. It seems to me like, you want to be pretty conservative with Conklin at this point.
Yeah, and the fact he's on the depth chart is a good sign.
Although Copeland was too.
That's true. I mean, I don't expect him to play this week, but the fact that it doesn't appear to be season long is obviously a very good thing.
The other thing, there's an analysis I would be sort of interested to do, and that's the number of oars on the depth chart versus whether or not the team wins in a given week. It seems like that would actually be something where you might find some predictive value in the number of oars. It's probably, I mean, I don't know. It would just be an interesting analysis to do.
I've tried to go back. I've tried to go back and find old depth charts, but I've had trouble with that. Like I thought there was one when they had maybe 3 co-starters at quarterback during the beginning of 2013, but I couldn't find it. Also in 2009 with all the running backs, I believe there were I mean, D'Antonio doesn't do the oars like he used to. I mean, there were some years in the preseason where just loaded, but I can't find the old depth charts.
Oh, I can show you where those are. I actually tweeted the 4 co-starter quarterback depth chart a little while ago. It's
you found it? Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's kind of a specific place on the MSU website, but you can go back and find them. And there's some that are pretty entertaining, like in 2009 when Colton Ray is the starter at running back. And
well, he started. I mean, he started that first game, and then he fumbled, and then he didn't play again.
Well, he started multiple games at the beginning of that 2009 year. But yeah, it was there. You can find them. You just kind of have to be smart looking on the archives page. There's like, if you look for the final score of a game, and then you look a couple below, because they used to not release. Yeah, because they used to not release the depth chart separately.
Right. That's a good call. Yeah.
Yeah. I am an expert in mining very random, useless MSU information.
So with this game, third down was obviously the big problem, allowing Central to convert. What was the final number? 7 for 15, and I mean, they barely converted any. I don't quite know how that breaks down by half, but they were might have been something like 6-8 in the first half, I think. So, and a lot of those were third and longs, 3rd and 10s, 3rd and 15s. That the passing game was giving up the holes. We've talked about the defensive backfield and being a problem. Do you take anything away from that negatively? Does that concern you moving forward?
Well, the thing I took away from that was just that Cooper Rush made some big-time throws. I mean, there were a couple, especially in that very first drive, where he kind of put one over the top of Monte Nicholson for a long first down conversion. No, I don't take a whole lot away from it. I mean, they were able to drive at times, but that seems like sort of a schematic thing that MSU's defense is doing now, sort of allowing a little bit of bend but don't break. More than in previous years. I don't know. I know that I should probably be more concerned about the secondary, but I'm not. I think that, a big chunk of it just has to do with not being as aggressive in the secondary as they used to be. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. My take on this is not particularly hot, unfortunately.
Well, I actually tweeted during the game that I was wondering when or if Darian Hicks would start to get playing time, because he was coming back from mono, and I mean he started all last year. And we talked about it before, and I tweeted. I said, I wonder if he's going to play. About 5 minutes later, he got in the game, and he played really well. That was, I think, a positive for MSU to take forward. They had Nicholson was benched a little bit because he was having a really rough game. His angles to the ball have been poor and in coverage sometimes too. And they moved Cox back to safety and had Hicks and Colhoun as the two corners. And Hicks did a pretty good job in the second half playing time that he got. And D'Antoni said that was a good thing. So I'm very curious to see moving forward who's going to be the starting corners in this game, regardless of whatever's on the depth chart. If Hicks will start, how much Hicks will play, where Cox fits. So that was something I found interesting as that game kind of developed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, seeing who ends up playing is interesting, but ultimately I think that as long as the pass rush is doing a pretty good job, which, Shilique Calhoun had a big game.
He was single-handedly putting the defense on his back in that second quarter, or where it was 17-10 there for a while, and he was with the pressure, he was getting drawn holds, getting sacks, just carrying the defense there for a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, so long as there's some pass rush, I'm not horribly concerned about it, especially because I think that quarterback play won't be quite as good in the beginning part of Big Ten play.
Right.
So, yeah, it's interesting in that it was a tricky non-conference slate overall, right? I mean,
I thought there's different ways to look at it, and you see the names Western Michigan, Air Force, Central Michigan, you don't think much, but they combined won, I think, 38 games last year. They all went to bowl games. The Oregon won 13 games, Air Force won 10 games, Western won 8, Central won 6 or 7. So that was from, in terms of total depth, that I would put MSU's non-conference schedule up against any Power 5 team. I mean, not the lower teams that take the payday games, but it was. I think there's something, to that they played pretty good teams, and I think a number of teams that they played. I think all of those teams are better than some of the teams that they'll play in Big Ten play. Not to name any names, but but you look at how they're ranked in the different analytic rankings, and that's the case. I mean, it'll also be the case as Central, Western, and Air Force kind of start to get some more wins when they get into conference play, as opposed to the games that they're favored to lose. Like I said, Central 4-0 against the spread. They could have beaten Oklahoma State. They should have beaten Syracuse, and they hung in there with MSU for quite a bit. It's a pretty good team. Western hung around with Ohio State for a little bit. They won 8 games last year, and Air Force is always difficult for anybody. So, and Oregon's Oregon. So, yeah, it was.
Well, so you touched on you've got there at the end to the elephant in the room, which is were you worried about, or did the Utah Oregon game concern you in any way with sort of where that ends up, what that suggests about MSU's quality?
That was maybe the number 2 or maybe even the number 1 story to kind of come out of the weekend regarding MSU as well. Now, did they actually? Is that Oregon win worth anything? And I said at the time that the fact that Vernon Adams was injured helped MSU, especially with the way he was throwing some of those deep balls. And I also think Utah's just a really good team. I mean, I thought at the beginning of the year, I think we might have talked about the game, but I was surprised that Utah was outside of the top 25 based on who they were bringing back and what they had done last year. And I'm not surprised by what they've done. I think it's a really good team. So that's part of it. The other part of it is Vernon Adams was sort of benched because his fingers still messed up, and he was benched for a guy who's not very good. And it kind of just snowballed on him from there. So with the healthy Vernon Adams, the MSU games may be different. The Utah games may be different.
Well, and Utah was scoring in some crazy ways at the end there. I mean, that 42-point spread ended up being, they did not let up on the gas in any way at the end of that game, which they could have.
And there's nothing wrong with that, especially with what Oregon's done to people. And you never know if they can kind of get on a roll, but I think Oregon is in trouble. But after the Oregon game, I told you I didn't think MSU played that well. I thought that MSU should have beaten them by more, and I said that after the game. And that Oregon also had a little bit of a strange game plan. But we talked about it. I didn't think MSU actually played that well in the game. And through 4 games, I don't think MSU's played all that well, but they're 4-0 against, like I said, I think 4 decent to good teams. And actually, Kevin Pago used to be the DFO or the director of basketball operations, had an interesting stat today. Through 4 games, MSU has been leading for 82% of the time. They've been leading for 82%. They've been tied for 17%. They've been trailing for 0.5%. They've been trailing for 1 minute and 8 seconds all season. And that was after Oregon took the opening drive down for a touchdown. Then MSU drove right back and tied the game. That's the only time they've been trailing all season. And I think that's, worth noting too. I mean, MSU's maybe had some ugly performances, but they've done more than enough to win the games at the same time too.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you take away from Utah, Oregon? And we don't really need to get into what it means for Michigan because it's not really relevant at this time of year. But what did you take away from it?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is just that there needs now to be really significant chaos elsewhere for MSU to make the playoff with a loss to Ohio State. Because to me, it seemed like if Oregon was a Pac-12 champion and there was a little bit of craziness elsewhere, you could make the argument that MSU had to play at Ohio State in Columbus, and that MSU team is the second or third best team in the country. Now I think it just would require there to be basically no 4th team for MSU to sort of get in there. But so that's the biggest thing. I think it's a sort of a ding against the strength of schedule non-conference. So in terms of the quality of MSU, I don't know. I think that 31-28 final score was a little bit misleading, partially because of the punt return touchdown.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we'll see a little bit more from this MSU team now that conference play is starting, even though the Purdue game probably won't be much more difficult than some of these non-conference games. But I think we'll see a little bit more in terms of play calling. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that MSU did in that Oregon game that we haven't seen before or since, like that offensive lineman shifting goofiness.
Yeah, I already know how I feel about that.
so yeah, I don't know. I guess ultimately the biggest takeaway there for me has less to do with the quality of MSU specifically, just because I think that they've proven it over the last couple of years. They're a pretty solid team,
right?
And more to do with sort of the circumstances that'll surround the team at the end of the year.
Right, and I mean, especially offensively, we haven't seen them, hit their stride, play their best, and they can. I mean, they'll obviously need to at some point, but the fact that they've, like I said, only trailed for a minute despite playing with relative to expectations, we kind of think has been maybe little subpar overall. There's a lot of room to grow there, and Aaron Burbridge was pretty shut down against Central. There wasn't a whole lot done in the passing game. How many passes did they end up throwing? I mean, Cook
finished 19. Cook had 19 attempts.
Yeah, 11 for 19, and they rushed the ball 36 times. Part of that was second half trying to run the clock out. But I mean, there hasn't been a game where Connor Cook has had to win them the game. I mean, Oregon was kind of like that, but I mean, they're like, he can do a lot better. We know he can do a lot better. We've seen it for 2 years. He's a senior, but I do think the offensive. That's going to be kind of my next point. The offensive line is starting to become a big issue, and the injuries are a big part of that. Cody Keeler is still out. Jack Conklin is out for a little bit. That's your two tackles, and you're replacing them with Dennis Finley, who hadn't really played before, and former junior college transfer Miguel Machado, or they're kind of mixing and matching some guys. But we've said it, they didn't have the depth coming into the season on the line that they had the previous 2 years. They had their starting five was their best offensive line that they had in the D'Antoni era, but the last two had the depth where they were able to move guys in and out and move them around to keep guys fresh. And they're not really able to do that right now. And when Finley came in, he gave up a sack, I think, right off the bat, and then gave up a holding penalty or committed a holding penalty. But he did get better as the game went on. But if you're having major issues at your two tackle spots, that's going to hamper anything you want to do on offense. And if the offense is going to get back on track, I think it's going to need to get more out of its offensive line, because there was some points in that Central game where Cook was starting to look at the line more than he was looking downfield, and he was panicking a little bit more than we'd seen him in quite a while because he was feeling the pressure. Was he really not sacked? They list him as not getting sacked. He was definitely taken down a number of times.
Yeah, I think there was one where he got basically back to the line of scrimmage. So
yeah,
they just counted
they've got four. They list 4 QB hurries.
Yeah,
but I'm pretty sure he got What were his rush attempts? Yeah, they have him on 3 rushes for 16 yards. I think there was an option run in there, but he was getting pressured more than he had been in a while. And until the offensive line kind of gets it together, it's going to be some tough sledding, especially in the running game.
Well, I thought that Dennis Finley, for the questionable play that he had in terms of the passing game, I thought he was pretty solid. In the running game, my guess is that it's probably a little bit simpler to come in and run block than be the left tackle in the passing game. But yeah, I mean, it's losing Jack Conklin is major. If it's for really any significant amount of time, right? So that'll be really interesting to watch, to see if he plays at all against Purdue on Saturday. And then just to see how Dennis Finley sort of fills in a little bit. But I was still, so at the end of that Central game, I was still somewhat soothed. I had that concern about MSU being unable to run the ball and sort of ice games at the end of games against Western and Oregon and Air Force. And they were able to do that against Central, even with Dennis Finley in the game. So I am, cautiously optimistic about that. And I think that there's ways that they can sort of mix in running backs and tight ends and RJ Shelton jet sweeps. And so I don't know. I'm not as concerned about the running game as I am with the passing at this point.
Yeah, something I was a little surprised about was LJ Scott did not get much carries. He had, what he finished with, 8 carries for 54 yards. Well, it was Gerald Holmes in the fourth quarter who was getting the attention. Sorry for the barking dogs, if you can hear that.
It's all right. They're just Spartan dogs in the background.
But yeah, he was he got most of his carries early, and a chunk of that 29 on 1 carry. So, what do you think of Holmes? We hadn't seen him in a while. What do you think of his short-time performance?
Well, what was really surprising to me about him was that when I look back at the stats for the game, he only had 4 carries. Based on sort of what I had been watching, it seemed to me like he had a bigger impact than only having 4 carries there at the end. So that was interesting. Yeah, I thought he did pretty well. I think that he earned himself a little bit more run in games. And I think that they'll probably try to do a slightly better job of mixing him in alongside Madre London and LJ Scott. And I think that that's a strength. To be able to hand the ball off to 3 different guys in different situations, sort of depending on who's playing well, I think is great. And it's an answer to a question that we had in the offseason, right? So you come out of non-conference and you go, okay, well, what do we know about this team now that we didn't know at the beginning of the year? And you know that you got some running backs. So that's a nice thing, and a nice question answered going into conference play.
Yeah, so before we get on to Purdue here, let's get into Purdue. So what Purdue comes into this, I don't even know. I've looked up their stats. I don't even know what their record is overall. What are they?
They're 1-3.
1-3.
Yeah, their only win is against Indiana State,
which is like the annual win. They lost to Marshall in the opener, which was they were driving to tie the game and gave up a pick 6 at the end, so they lost by 10. But when I was watching that game, they looked pretty good, I thought, and they beat Indiana State. Then they host Virginia Tech, kind of get blown out, and then they host and lose to Bowling Green last weekend on the last second touchdown. And Bowling Green's kind of a weird team because they're like that Baylor style where they can put up a ton of points, but they can also kind of win and lose to anybody, and they end up beating Purdue. So Purdue comes in at 1-3. The Darrell Hazel era has not been pretty. They've made a change at quarterback. What jumps out to you about this team first off?
They're very much Purdue, right? I don't, they made a mid-season quarterback change already. They're playing freshman David Bluff, I think is how that's pronounced, over Austin Appleby at this point. Their statistical profile is very meh. They don't allow a whole lot of big plays. They're top 25 in the nation in terms of ISO points per play, which is Bill Connolly's measure of explosiveness. But other than that, they're not very impressive. When you lose to Marshall and to Bowling Green, and then also get blown out by Virginia Tech, that's sort of what you expect. They're 105th overall in the Massey composite ratings, and MSU is actually a larger favorite in this game per Spartan Dan's rankings than I think they were against Central. So
that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, so it's poor Purdue. The funny thing about Purdue too, though, is that I did some analysis using some game data from Brian Fremo over the offseason, and for whatever reason, D'Antonio coached MSU teams tend to underperform against Purdue, especially at home for whatever reason. There's a 2008 game that was 21-7, which was unusually close. Purdue wasn't this kind of,
and MSU wasn't this either, but
right. But even in 2010, when there was the crazy comeback with a blocked punt necessary to beat Purdue at home, when MSU was a 1-loss team at that point at the end of the year, and then even 2 years ago when it was a 14-0 game in 2013, and then last year when Purdue had the ball and had a chance to tie the game up, and a pick 6 ended up sealing it for MSU. So it's been pretty interesting, and I have no good explanation for why MSU tends to play Purdue in close games. So I don't know if it's a schematic thing or if it's just, it's hard to get motivated against Purdue, but yeah, it's
And
there's
that's
no
all, I mean,
no reason MSU shouldn't blow them out, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't just because.
I mean, that's over multiple Purdue coaching staffs too. I mean, Daryl Hazel, his first year, like I said, the 14-0 game. Then last year, they almost complete the comeback at home. So as much as we just, and a lot of people, I think, dismiss Purdue for whatever reason, they've played this close. It's kind of like Indiana and Ohio State. Sometimes teams just have whatever it is, and I mean, with the way this team plays, they've actually thrown the ball the exact same amount of times that they've run the ball, 159 each. They're scoring 30 points a game, but they're giving up 35. But the way that they're molded in a bit of a trestle. I mean, Daryl Hazel comes from the trestle tree, but there's a little bit more passing because it's Purdue. David Bluff had that big game against Bowling Green, even though it was in a loss and it was against Bowling Green. But do you think there's a chance he can kind of move the ball on the MSU secondary?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to move the ball a little bit, just because of the little bit softer scheme that I think MSU's been running. Yeah, I mean, I think that Purdue's going to have some difficulty running the ball in this game, just because they haven't run the ball particularly well all year. So I think, yeah, they'll depend on David Bluff, and yeah, I have not a ton of confidence in him. He does seem to be a little bit better than Austin Appleby in the limited time that he's gotten. But yeah, my guess is that Purdue drives the ball a little bit, but ultimately I'm not concerned about explosive plays by Purdue or anything like that. Now, I'm not sure if that totally answers your question, but
I mean, yeah, I mean, other side of the ball, Purdue comes in, like I said, allowing 35 points, giving up 4.3 yards per carry. Is this a game where MSU has to show that they can run the ball?
I mean, I think that they've shown that already to some extent, right? The split, I actually don't know what the split is in terms of the run-pass ratio so far this year, but it's been pretty significant. There have been some...
Are you talking about for MSU?
Yeah, exactly.
Let me see. They've run it 155. They passed it 105. So about almost 2 to 1. Not 2 to 1.
It's like 1.5 to 1.
Yeah.
So 3 to 2, right? So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think MSU's proven that it can run the ball a little bit. They, sack adjusted, it was 5.6 yards per carry against Central, and it's been above 5 in a few games this year. I think it was below 4 against Air Force, but I think they'll be able to run the ball without too much difficulty, and it'll sort of depend on the pace of the game, right? If Purdue can score early a little bit, then I think we'll see a lot more passing out of Connor Cook. But no, I'm very confident that MSU will be able to run the ball in this game.
I mean, there's not much to say. Like I said, they run the ball, pass the ball evenly. They're not going to do anything spectacular on either side. It's kind of one of those games where it just comes down to executing. And I think we have some questions about this MSU team that will need to be answered. So, what did you say the line was? Do you know what the line was, or have you looked it up?
So, yeah, Spartan Dan's has it as MSU by 26. I think that the Vegas line is MSU by 21.5.
I'm pulling that up right now here.
Yeah, I think that the Vegas line is a little bit lower than it was for the Central game, but
at 21.5.
It isn't 44.5 like LSU's line over Eastern, but
it's an over/under of 55 too. So we're not expecting much out of the Purdue offense.
Well, I think that the expectation's probably similar, where there'll be relatively few possessions overall.
Right. And that's I mean, that's part of the reason MSU's 0-4 against the spread, at least in the last 2 games, that they've simply just, like we said, haven't run a lot of plays. So,
and there was that garbage time touchdown by Air Force in that game as well. Yeah, I mean, for various reasons. That spread statistic, the 0-4 against the spread thing to me means a little bit less than it probably should, just because this MSU team isn't trying to score by passing the ball like they did.
But when you're ranked number 2, you're gonna get criticized or kind of put under a microscope for every little thing you did. Like a lot of people dropped MSU out of their top 4 or playoff projections without even mentioning what they did against Central. They people drop them out and say, man, that Oregon win's not that big anymore. So without MSU changing much of anything, the perception changes. So, and I think that just plays into it a little bit. And when you're in this position, when you've got 4 or a committee of people picking, that'll get to.
It's also unfortunate that there's no good crossover game that MSU gets. Like, if MSU got Northwestern or Wisconsin from the West, then you might be able to make another argument about strength of schedule. But because teams that are out of the West,
they could play at Nebraska. I think they got a harder cross conference schedule than Michigan and Ohio State has.
Right. But I'm saying, Right. But also that Nebraska game to me is looking less and less scary. I mean, coming into the year, I remember you saying that you were not bullish on Nebraska, and that I was a little bit surprised by that. But to this point, I mean, they barely eked out that win over Southern Miss this past weekend.
Let's hit that. Right. Give me a pick. Give me a score pick, and then we can kind of get into that and some other topics. What do you think in score?
Okay, I think it's going to be probably lower scoring and a slower pace again. So I'll say something like MSU 31, Purdue 14.
No, man, I'm at close. I'm going with the exact same score last game. We're going to go with 30-10. So,
wow, that would be crazy.
I don't think. I mean, who knows? We're just picking for the hell of it. We're not. Nobody's an expert. If we could pick these easily, we wouldn't be in this business. But just for fun,
I certainly wouldn't be telling people what my picks were if I was trying to make money from them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I know a lot less about Purdue than I knew about Central last week. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so as we look at the rest of the schedule here, you want to talk about Nebraska? Yeah, they just don't really seem to have an identity, and I didn't think they would because they come in with a recently pass-happy offense with Danny Langsdorf as the offensive coordinator, and they get Tommy Armstrong as their QB, and he's most definitely not that. So, I mean, how are you looking at that? So what are you looking at that game right now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't watched a ton of Nebraska to this point, but I will say that their loss to BYU looks worse now. After
and I'll say
pasting.
That would have been. It probably wouldn't have even come down to the Hail Mary if Taysom Hill hadn't gotten hurt either.
Right, which is interesting. Yeah, I'm not totally sure, what to make of that, of BYU in general. I mean, it seems like BYU is just sort of a wild card in general. But yeah, I think that Nebraska is going to, if they don't already, just really miss Bo Pelini. And I think that their game at Illinois this week could be a relatively interesting one, just because because Illinois hasn't been terrible. I mean, they haven't really beaten anybody, but they did beat up on Kent State, and Middle Tennessee is not
Middle Tennessee's
the worst.
Middle Tennessee's a pretty good offense, and they held them to something like 25 points. So, but Illinois did get blown out at North Carolina. In college football, it's so hard to judge week to week what you're going to get from guys and teams. But I do think that's interesting. In the West in general is just completely wide open. Northwestern's 4-0. Wisconsin's kind of Wisconsin, but they've got Claude Clement down for a little bit. Minnesota's 3-1, but a weird 3-1 because they played TCU tough, but then they barely beat Kent State and Ohio. Nebraska's there. Iowa's has looked pretty good. whoever comes out of the East is, I think, actually going to have a difficult challenge in that Big Ten championship game, and that wasn't something I expected at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, the new Wisconsin running back, his name is Twan Deal. When I read that at first, I thought it was like whatever I was reading had more to do with like foreign policy. But yeah, I mean, Wisconsin just gets lucky because they don't have to really play anybody from the East, whereas everybody else has a tough game. I guess other than Northwestern, Northwestern has a relatively easy schedule for the Big Ten West, except for having to travel to Wisconsin. And they also travel to Michigan, so that's a relatively difficult game as well. But yeah, it's too bad that we don't get to play, that MSU doesn't get to play Wisconsin or Northwestern or even Iowa, just to sort of improve the strength of schedule. Because unless, you know, Western, Air Force, and Central end up being at the top of their respective conferences, it's going to be, I think strength of schedule is going to be a real issue when you look at it from a numbers perspective, just in terms of how bad much of the Big Ten East is. I mean, Rutgers and Maryland and Penn State are doing us no favors at this point. So, and Indiana for that matter. I mean, I don't know. The thing about Indiana is, even though they're 4-0, their spreads against the bad teams that they've played so far have not been impressive. So,
right.
Yeah,
but when you're
something.
Indiana, I mean, they used to lose those games. You know, after they beat Missouri, I think they lost to Bowling Green or something like that last year. So a win's a win, and they need them right now. So they host Ohio State this weekend without College game day, unfortunately. But
no,
they'll be
they'll have Dan Dakich game day, which is decidedly worse.
Yeah, his relationship with Indiana fans is a weird one, but
his relationship with anybody is a weird one. It seems like. I mean, he's been hassling the Crimson Quarry, which is the Only Colors' sister blog, pretty consistently on Twitter, and it's kind of entertaining to watch, but also kind of unfortunate because he's like a legitimate media type. But
no, he's not though, because remember, he always rips on the media, but he says he's not, and he searches his name on Twitter, which is always fun because sometimes I'll just tweet things about him and add like a "Hi Dan" at the end of it because I know he's going to see it because he just searches his name. I wonder if he can audio search his name in this podcast and listen to it. But
that would be next level. I don't think he's got the technology for that.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is on Connor Cook. So no secret, he has not had a great start to the season. And I read some back and forth tweets between Daniel Jeremiah, who's kind of a scouting writer at Move the Sticks on Twitter, and a couple other guys who write about the draft. And they keep saying they've heard just not good things about Cook, which with the way he's played, I think is fair. But the thing that a lot of people are coming back to, which I really find ridiculous, is we talked about this, I think, back in the summer, but the fact that Cook was not named a captain, like to some NFL scouts, that like was an eyebrow raiser. I just think that's such a lazy thing to like talk about when there's plenty of issue. I mean, there's plenty of issue he has with his play, especially this year. To come back to the captaincy is just really dumb. Like it reminds me of like Mark Helfrich telling ESPN's Brett McMurphy that NFL scouts said the fact that Marcus Mariota had no red flags was a red flag. Like, just, I mean, Teddy Bridgewater's hands being too small. I feel like sometimes these NFL scouts are like, it's their job to like evaluate everything, pull in just absolutely every piece of information they can when making an evaluation. But you can't make an evaluation. You can't let a tiny thing factor in bigger than it should. I mean, when McGarrett Kings caught that diving catch, Big Ten Network
at the very beginning, yeah.
Right. Big Ten Network reported that when they got to the sideline after that touchdown drive, Cook ripped into Kings because Kings slowed up on that route, and the reason he had to dive was because he wasn't running full speed in the route. So Cook apparently took issue with that, and that's leadership right there. So he doesn't have the label of a captain. I mean, there's an example of him showing that. So I don't know. I thought this captaincy thing was done, and I just wanted to say it's really stupid because Cook has struggled. I mean, I'm looking at quarterbacks right now. I would take Cal's Jared Goff over Cook if I was an NFL team. I think he's got everything you'd want. Cook never gave off the. Cook never seemed to be a guy who would be a top 10 pick, a franchise quarterback type of guy. He seems like he's always felt like the type of player who'd be like a solid player in the NFL and hang around, like maybe like kind of like Hoyer and Cousins have. But I don't know if Cook is that top franchise guy. Coming into the year, he was considered the top senior quarterback. Him and Christian Hackenberg were going to be first-round picks and break that long Big Ten streak. Well, through 4 games, it's not looking good for Cook in that end right now in terms of NFL scouting. What do you think of Cook right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got it spot on. There are plenty of reasons to criticize Cook that have nothing to do with whether or not he was elected as a captain. And so, I mean, I don't know. There could be other things that if scouts having talked to coaches, other people who were involved with Cook when it comes to his involvement with other quarterback coaches. I think it was George Whitfield was the guy that he was going to being coached by in the last couple off seasons. So who knows where some of that stuff comes from, and sometimes it's maybe you can't release details if you're a scout, but you can point to something like he isn't a captain and blah blah blah. But
how about he still throws off his back foot way too much because his footwork isn't good? Like
consistency to me would be the biggest thing.
Right, that's been an issue his whole career, and it still is, and it's perfectly fair to criticize that, even maybe not as much as Ed Cunningham did last year, but it is a legitimate thing, and he has the ability to take over games. We've seen that. We saw it in the Cotton Bowl, the Rose Bowl, the Big Ten Championship. But he doesn't consistently bring that kind of performance. You see him go, was he 15 for 31 against Western, about 50% completions against he's not turning the ball over, but he's not completing a high rate of passes from a guy you would want to be your first-round pick quarterback.
Yeah. To me, it's one of those things where there has to be some guy who ends up being the number 1 pick at quarterback, right? And so sometimes you end up being the default guy, and that could end up being Cook to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, Christian Ponder and EJ Manuel were first-round picks, weren't they?
Right. So you go, well, yeah. And it's possible that he'll improve over the course of the year, right? There's still a lot of season left. And it's certainly not over. It's concerning that he improved dramatically from end of 2012 to 2013, but where he got to by the end of 2013, he hasn't really improved much since then. It seems like to me, in terms of consistency, it's still every once in a while he'll sell one and you go, oh, who was that quarterback? Was that the same guy that I saw, drop one in on a 4th down to Aaron Burbridge in that Oregon game in the 3rd quarter? But it's weird. I got no good read on Cook or how he'll perform play to play, and that kind of consistency I think is why there's still some contingent of MSU fans that are not big Connor Cook fans, which I think is interesting.
The Tommy Vento bandwagon's getting bigger. MSU with the quarterbacks have always been kind of interesting. Hoyer was always an interesting way how people looked at him, but you see him made it. He's been in the NFL for quite a while now, so he had something going for him. And I feel like sometimes maybe been criticized a couple times on Twitter for maybe being too negative on this. Cook's about to break Kirk Cousins' I think wins record, and he deserves credit for that. We're by no means saying he's a bad quarterback. It's just when you're you've got the number 2 team in the country. You're thinking people are talking national championship. You're evaluated often relative to expectations. Now there are plenty of good things about this team. Shirley Calhoun, who also turned down the draft, has so far been, I think improving his stock as much as he could. He's been a beast this year. Defensive line has looked strong. Riley Bulla, always in the right, just seems to always be in the right place at the right time. Picking up that fumble on the when Calhoun got beat but forced a fumble, Riley Bulla was there to pick it up, and he's near the top of the country, I think, in tackles. And we talked about how he got shook a couple times early against Western and had struggled to make some tackles in open space, but he's always in the right position to make the play, and I think that's a good thing. I think they did miss him in the first half when Shane Jones had to play while he was out with the targeting penalty. But in the defensive backfield, I've struggled to find a ton of positives. I think each of the cornerbacks has struggled. The safety, R.J. Williamson's been pretty good this year, but he's kind of getting banged up, so he's a question mark too. But so we kind of wrap this up. What do you take positive from this number 2 ranked team in the country?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that you sort of have to think about that in any respect, right? I mean, I think I don't know if that just says more about MSU football fans and their collective mindset overall, but yeah, there's always lots of criticism in any sense. The biggest thing to me is that I think that the defensive scheme has evolved a little bit to sort of handle the issues that we saw last year against Ohio State and Oregon, and I'm encouraged by that. The fact that Oregon wasn't able to hit any big plays against MSU in that game was big, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that sort of fares against other big play offenses, because I think that this MSU offense is probably good enough to outscore some teams. So I'm just glad to see that the coaching staff is evolving along with sort of the roster that they've got.
And as we kind of get into more Big Ten play, it'll be interesting to see what kind of things they open up, because when you get into conference play, these teams have game planned for you multiple times, so they know what you run. So you got to come up with some different things. So yeah, we both pick MSU wins over Purdue, and maybe kind of a bit of a slow and boring game. But anything else you wanted to touch on?
Oh, so one last thing. This was a hypothetical that I posed to Matt McIntyre. Who, well, let me finish. So so my hypothetical to Matt, and I'm interested to hear what your response would be to this as well, although I'm pretty sure I know what your response is. And it was funny to ask Matt because he's such a basketball guy, but would you prefer on Saturday, when Miles Bridges announces his decision on Saturday between noon and 2, would you prefer a Miles Bridges commitment to Michigan State along with an upset loss against Purdue, or Miles Bridges committing to Kentucky and MSU winning, in a boring game like we've predicted?
Well, it brings up an interesting thing that I had mentioned earlier this week, and that's MSU's football season is a one-game season. They have to beat Ohio State. They have to win the Big Ten West, and then win the Big Ten. And I asked, would you rather lose to Ohio State, or would you rather lose to Michigan and beat Ohio State or win the conference championship? Or at least which one is more likely to get you in the playoff? And the answer is the latter. You're going to have to beat Ohio State. I think the MSU football team, well, maybe not. Could they overcome a loss to Purdue if they win out and maybe beat Ohio State even handily? Because Ohio State made the championship last year, losing to Virginia Tech, though that was in week 2. Let me ask you that. Do you think they could afford the loss to Purdue?
Yeah, you'd have to be, if you were a one-loss conference champion, you are in.
And so there you go. That's kind of, if I was an MSU fan, that would probably. But on the other hand, is one basketball recruit going to make the world of difference when they've already got a pretty good stacked team and class coming in? I don't know. I think it's a fair question. I guess I could see either answer, so I'm copping out. But I think it's worth noting that they may be able to overcome a loss to Purdue. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you take the win against Purdue just because you don't know. Miles Bridges could have a major injury tomorrow or on that Sunday, and you would never he could. There's no guarantee that he ever even winds up playing for MSU, right? So yeah, I mean, I think you take the win, but I think it's a more fun hypothetical than it should be, just because.
Yeah.
But I think to your hypothetical between beating Ohio State and losing to Michigan, but making the playoff, or beating Michigan, losing to Ohio State, and then going to what would presumably be the Rose Bowl or another Big Six bowl, is also an interesting one. And versions of that hypothetical I think have kind of circled MSU fans for a long time, though, because I think
but I don't think it should be even be. I couldn't believe how many MSU fans said they would rather take the win over Michigan. Like, are you really that? Like, I don't want to say inferior. Yeah, spiteful. Like, you've won. What is it? 5 or 6 or 6? I don't even remember how many it is anymore. Like, I couldn't believe there were MSU fans that would actually take that over. But I had a couple respond to me. Are you in that boat? Because if I'm an MSU person, I think without a shadow of a doubt, you take the conference championship.
Yeah, no, I definitely am in that boat. You take the conference championship and going to the playoff, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it's just a funny question because I think that there's a large, and versions of those hypotheticals have been floated around, right? Where it's like, would you prefer to beat Michigan or lose to Michigan, but have some larger goal get achieved?
Right, and it comes into play here too, because it could legitimately come into play here, which is why I brought it up. So yeah.
And interestingly, so okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, Bridges will be committing during the football game, so you won't see it live, but MSU fans who are at home can tune into that.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting too, just to see if I'll be able to get the news during the game, because something tells me that it'll be a big, there'll be some big thing that kind of goes around Spartan Stadium when that announcement happens, right? Like there's no way the university can't comment on on it at all. So, I mean, I don't know. I wonder if we'll get a weird big cheer from the student section or something when it happens, because Bridges also said that it's between 12 and 2 that he's making his decision, which is a pretty long period of time.
Which means it's 2.
Right, probably. So, I mean, it's kind of like waiting for the Comcast guy, although I think we've done plenty of Comcast bashing on this podcast as well.
Actually, I got to take this old router, and that's a good I'm ready to this old one that I have. I want to wait to new. I want to make sure make sure the new one works. So, all right, I think we're good here. Hey, you good?
Yep, that's all I got.
All right, thanks for listening, guys. Subscribe on iTunes. Follow us on Twitter at Chris Vannini, at Jobin #2 Check out theonlycars.com for a lot of great stuff as always during the week. And thanks for listening. See you.
See ya.